Hello, we are speaking with Brad Johnson, senior reporter at the Texan, and Jasper Scherer, the politics reporter at the Texas Tribune. Happy New Year, guys, and welcome to Eye on Politics.
Thanks for having us.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, and you bet. And so let's start our conversation with what I think are going to be really some of the top issues facing Texas in the next year. Let's start with border security. We've got President-elect Trump coming in for his second administration now, and he wants to crack down on the border. And we've got a new legislative session taking place as well, and there's still a lot of border bills. And so, one thing I was struck by was that after the election last month, Governor Abbott said that he can foresee a time where the state would be spending less money on border security because President Trump will want to crack down on the border and tighten illegal immigration. And so, talk to me a little bit about that. What did you make of that conversation? Jasper, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think the folks in charge of the Texas legislature have been pretty clear over the last 4 years, the last couple budget cycles, where they've been pouring money into border security. That their preference would be to not have to devote such a sizable chunk of the budget to that cause, and they have talked about. I know Governor Abbott has talked about trying to recoup some of that money from the federal government. Even I'm not holding my breath for that, even under unified Republican control in Congress. I think that would be a heavy lift, but it sounds like at least initially, Governor Abbott and some Republicans have signaled openness to spending less on border security. I think Governor Abbott has said that he expects to, still spend some amount. The state, even before Biden took office, was spending around $800 million every 2 years on sort of a less aggressive form of border enforcement prior to Operation Lone Star. So it's reasonable to expect something. I think Abbott has said, just while Trump ramps up his policies, it's not going to be an overnight thing. So he expects Texas will still pour some money into it. But if they're spending, that they've spent around 5 billion, 6 billion over the last 2 years, that's, billions that could go towards property tax cuts, public education spending, maybe even an education savings account program. So there's going to be a lot of hands kind of competing for this for the cookie jar for the budget surplus. And I think the Republican leaders will be eager to put that elsewhere, as long as they can do it without looking like they're being soft on the border or anything like that.
Brad.
Yeah, Jasper's exactly right. The budget surplus is estimated to be about $21 billion next year, and that's about $10 billion less than they had last biennium or the current biennium. So any money that does get freed up because of the Trump administration's increased presence at the border will allow that to go elsewhere for various other fights. The water fight is going to be a big one this year as well. But I'm also curious to see what policy they decide to either revisit or implement or visit in the first place. The Border Protection Unit went down in a blaze of glory last year at a point of order at a midnight deadline. People forget, that was a priority of Speaker Dade Phelan. And it had the blessing of leadership, I guess, until it died by a point of order. But is that something that gets revisited? Is that something that Texans feel the need to revisit, given the presumed fact that the Trump administration and Border Patrol will increase their resources on the border? And the other factor is, of course, the human element. If the Trump administration does increase its presence there, that allows a lot of Texans serving in the Texas military and DPS on the border to come home and not have to spend any more time there than they already have.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you brought up the Border Protection Unit, and I saw a bill, I believe it was filed by Briscoe Kane down in the Houston area, calling for a Border Protection Unit. And I was amazed because there are still people who want to ramp up state efforts on the border. I believe Senator Creighton has filed a bill that would have eminent domain so that the state can take the land to actually build more border wall. And I know the Texas Tribune just did a whole report on the border wall efforts and how it's really up to individual landowners to decide whether to allow the state to build a wall on their property.
Yeah, and just to revisit Brad's point about the border protection unit and kind of the human element there, I think, that was an explicit part of the aim of the border protection unit as it was envisioned last regular session. Matt Schaefer, the East Texas Republican who was kind of spearheading that effort in the House, he said in a committee hearing that essentially the goal was to create sort of a permanent force so that the state wouldn't be relying on sort of this ad hoc solution where the essentially the National Guard is not meant to serve as this permanent force where a lot of these folks have jobs that they're stepping away from for months at a time, from families. They were not intending to do this. So I think that's that the border protection unit idea will certainly get at least some play, and some of that might depend on who the speaker is in the Texas House. But and on the wall, I do think that is one of the costs, that the big kind of continuing costs, even if we see Texas spending less in state funds on border security, on Operation Lone Star, and depending on how robust a potential border unit would look like. It does seem pretty clear that Governor Abbott wants to see this project through. They're not just going to abandon it while they just have a few segments up here and there. One of the questions we were just talking about, the sort of the issue of federal money and any help from the feds. Of course, Trump has famously talked about wanting to build a wall himself. It remains to be seen how, if there'd be room for collaboration between the state of Texas and the feds in building a wall. So that's really one of the biggest unanswered questions heading into the Trump administration, I think.
Brad, what do you think of that idea that Jasper just talked about, collaboration between the federal government and the state government as it is to build a wall? Because we've already seen Governor Abbott and the land commissioner, Dr. Dawn Buckingham, really pledge help as far as having Texas land be used for the crackdown by the federal government on illegal immigration.
Well, we've seen in the past, and most notably during the first Trump administration, how difficult it is to get this thing built when you have united front from Republicans, both in the federal government and the state government. It's just because of the nature of commandeering land through eminent domain, it's just difficult to do. And you're going to run into people that don't want to sell no matter what, no matter to whom. They're just not going to want to sell a portion of their land. So this will help having them united together, trying to facilitate this. But it's no given, and the fact that it's a very large amount of money, regardless of whether it's worth it or not, still a large pot of money to build this thing. And I think the Tribune's reporting showed what, Jasper, 50 miles or something like that that's been constructed. That's not a lot. And I understand that those are strategically placed in certain areas and they'll expand from there, but it's just been a slog so far, and I don't see that stopping just based on the sheer nature of it and the difficult terrain of the Texas border.
We've got a lot of topics, so I want to move on and talk a little bit about public education. Governor Abbott has said he's got the votes to pass school choice. The big question is that really true? Brad, what do you think of that?
I think on the very basis, yes, it's there, but as always, the devil's in the details, and there's going to be a fight over not just how much money to allot to this, but the accountability measures to tie to it. What do we do with STAR testing? I remember I heard Dustin Burrows, candidate for speaker, say this might be a session where we eliminate STAR testing. And that kind of runs into a problem when we're talking about a negotiated deal on school choice and education savings accounts. Where do you go from there on that? What other measures do you implement? How do you prioritize who gets these ESAs? And we're just going to have to face the fact, I think, that you're going to have to tie it to a very large amount of money given to public schools through school finance program and into teacher pay. We saw that last year, and that didn't pass. I don't see the ball having moved enough yet to pass a standalone ESA bill. Um, this is going to be the subject of a massive debate, not just in the Senate, but not just in the House, but also the Senate. How do we structure this so we can get something through? Because nobody wants to leave next session, at least nobody that wants ESAs wants to leave next session empty-handed entirely.
Jasper, doesn't Brad bring up a good point in the sense of how is this going to look and whether Republicans are going to be united in the bill that they put forward? I mean, there has been some legislation that's already been put out there, but we obviously haven't seen yet the legislation that the lieutenant governor is going to back, and the same thing with whatever and whoever the speaker is going to be, what they're going to back, along with the governor.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be clear, heading into this session, the idea of school vouchers, education savings accounts has more momentum than it has ever had, in at least in recent memory in Texas, maybe ever. I think there is a degree of reluctance, maybe even fear on the part of some of the House members who might have traditionally considered voting the other way. They just don't want to get on Governor Abbott's bad side. They've seen, the lengths he's willing to go to get what he wants on this issue. But that said, it seems like a fairly slim pro education savings account majority in the House. Abbott's estimated whip count is around 79 votes, which lines up with what I'm seeing. But I think that's 3 or 4 votes of wiggle room there, where if you introduce a school choice bill that 4 of those votes, those members can't get on board with, then you introduce a provision to placate them. You get those holdouts on board. Maybe that new provision gets 4 others off the train. So I think it is still, it could be finicky. It's far from guaranteed right now, and I think there are real questions about some of the accountability measures involved. That was one of the sticking points between the House and the Senate last time. So I think it's cautious optimism for the pro school choice folks, but also I think the Democrats and the limited number of remaining anti-ESA House Republicans, that coalition, they still have reason to at least hope that they can gum up the works and sort of just that the pro ESA folks will fumble the ball, as they're running into the end zone here.
The next real question, I think, is what is the impact going to be on this debate over public education altogether? Because the Senate passed separate legislation the last time, and then the House tried to get it through with this just enormous bill with school choice and increases to public education. And obviously, that didn't work either. So, how is this all going to shake out? I mean, is there going to be a separate legislation? Because there are a lot of Republicans, aside from Democrats, who support giving public schools more money.
Well, I think the early signals are that it's probably going to be separate legislation. That's of course TBD, but just a lot of the pro ESA folks that I've been talking to, and just the sort of the chatter I've been hearing, is that those folks want these issues to be separate. That is what the Senate did, at least during the regular session last year. And I think, that also raises the question of, even if these are presented in 2 separate bills, education savings account and increases in public school funding, I guess that doesn't necessarily mean that these issues are suddenly severed or completely separate. If a school finance bill reaches Governor Abbott's desk, he could very easily still say, "I'm not touching this thing until you send me a voucher ESA bill." So I think it's there's no way to fully decouple this conversation. I think there are some folks who want to see an education savings account bill pass, who are still I don't know if they would be reluctant to support it without public school funding, but they are at least equally adamant about seeing raises for teachers and that kind of stuff. So it's I think the takeaway for me is that it's impossible to completely decouple these two issues.
Brad, what do you think?
I think they try and start with separate bills, but I don't see it ending up there, at least in the House. The political realities are still pretty difficult for something like that to get passed. And obviously, as I said, who knows what the actual details of these accountability measures are, and that's going to determine a lot. If they can strike a balance on that, they may be able to get this across the line on its own. But I kind of feel the opposite of Jasper. I think they're going to have to eventually tie this to a very large school funding increase, not just for the next biennium, but for the one that failed the last time, along with teacher pay. It's just I'm not sure that the political appetite is there for a standalone bill. We see in DC, there's always talk about we need to pass standalone single issue bills, and then it doesn't happen because it's just too difficult to get their 450 odd members together. Here, 150 in the House. There's just too many moving parts, and that's why they had to go with an omnibus bill last time around in 23, and I think we'll eventually be right back there.
So one other issue I want to bring up, and you mentioned a little bit before, Brad, and that's property taxes. Um, Obviously, people still say they are too high in the state of Texas. We know that there is a $20-21 billion projected surplus. And so is there going to be a fight over how to reduce property taxes like we saw last year?
I don't think we'll see a fight quite like we did last year. Last year we had these two competing visions on how to reform property taxes. On the one hand, the Senate side, homestead exemption increase. On the other hand, an appraisal cap for all real property. Um, the homestead exemption increase won. The Senate won that fight. And I don't think anybody's really rearing for another clash like we saw last time around. But I have seen an increased number of bills filed to try and establish more appraisal cap, a limitation on appraisal increases. I think eventually that's something that we have this quote circuit breaker in place for 3 years for certain small $5 million or less business property. I could see that kind of building down the road, maybe supplementing that. But a 5% appraisal cap receives so much opposition from not just the Senate, but large businesses in the state. They preferred the homestead exemption and the compression. Compression is going to be a continuous aspect of this. It's just the nature of the school finance system. There's some talk on the right about eliminating property taxes. Lieutenant Governor has extinguished that pretty forcefully. It's just not going to happen. It would take so much money, and either you're going to get,
Wasn't it like $82 billion or
yeah,
something
an
like that?
insane amount,
Yeah.
and you'd have to, yeah, if you remove the state from it, then you're going to increase local property tax bills by quite a bit. And if you remove the local property tax side of this, you're going to have to rely on state consumption tax. And we're already relying so much on consumption tax that right now is really good, but it's not always going to be that way. This property tax debate, I think, for now is going to be settled. Uh, at least not to the level that we saw. It's not going to blow up to the level we saw last year. Nobody wants the same fight we had last time, although, tinkering at the margins may well happen.
Jasper.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of this is it kind of hinges on the House Speaker's race, and it sort of shows the importance of that outcome, not just in terms of deciding how conservative the House and the legislature gets, but also just in terms of the relations between the chambers and Dustin Burrows was of course, a member of Speaker Phelan's leadership team, was a big a central cog in those negotiations, those prolonged negotiations in with the House and Senate over how exactly to deliver those property tax cuts last year. So, I don't know exactly what his opponent, David Cook's preferred position is. I don't know what approach he would take, in terms of aligning more with Dan Patrick on wanting to continue hiking up the homestead exemption, or whether he would I guess prefer some combination that, which seems like probably the most likely route we're going to go. I think Brad's right that there's just about everyone is motivated to not have sort of the endless special session, intractable drama that we had last summer. So I feel like the kind of the odds-on favorite right now is to have some combination of what we call compression, basically the state sending money to replace the local property tax burden for public schools, and also raising the homestead exemption a certain amount. I think the other question is just how much money goes into this, because again, it's a smaller surplus than last time. I think there is going to be a lot of pressure from some folks to put more money into an education savings account program than was on the table last time. So that's already a lot of cost when you're talking about water infrastructure, school choice, um, school finance, raises for teachers and whatnot. It's a big issue could just be simply how much of this money goes toward property tax relief.
Well, speaking of drama, let's talk about the political drama that is the race for Texas House Speaker between Representative David Cook and Representative Dustin Burrows. How do you see this shaking out? Because the Texas House GOP caucus clearly is behind Representative Cook, and yet Representative Burrows has his share of Republicans, albeit less than Cook. So how do you see this shaking out? Jasper, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is still up in the air right now. That we're at least allegedly in sort of a cooling off period over the holidays, sort of left it at an impasse in some ways, where at least publicly, neither of the two speaker candidates had enough votes to say they were at 76, the majority needed to lock it up. So I think one of the big questions right now is whether for Dustin Burrows, he's got this bipartisan coalition supporting him, and he's clearly trying to get more Republicans back on board. Even get some Republicans on board who were never with him in the first place, and sort of create this air of inevitability that sort of might convince some Republicans to see, even if they haven't been supporting him because they think he's capitulating to Democrats, or they're worried about inviting primary challenges. I think the mission for Burrows right now is to appeal to those Republicans and sort of create this sense that the train is leaving the station. You better get on board if you want to have any amount of influence in the House. And then for Cook, it's there's been some noise about him reaching out to Democrats, trying to expand his coalition. I think he has a tougher assignment in the sense that his team, the folks supporting him, his allies, are sort of going through this route of it's kind of a pressure campaign in some ways, as opposed to and maybe they're kind of going about it both ways, where Cook is talking to Democrats, trying to get some of the Republicans on board with him, and his allies are, sending text messages to these Republican holdouts threatening to spend money against them in their districts. So I say it's a tougher challenge for Cook because I think there are a lot of Republicans who are kind of dug in against the wing of the party who is supporting Cook, and it's a tough sell for him to appeal to Democrats, because a lot of what his speakership bid is predicated on removing this tradition of power sharing with the minority party, not giving Democrats chairmanship. So it's a tough sell for Democrats, and he's also got to convince the Republican holdouts to abandon their positions. I think that could be tough.
Brad?
Jasper mentioned the pressure campaign, and he's absolutely right. This has turned into what used to be a very behind-the-scenes backroom contest, is turned into basically a statewide political campaign. All these texts going into various districts, trying to get voters ginned up, either to put pressure on their representatives to support one candidate or the other, or oppose one or the other. This very much is a statewide political race, which is just we haven't seen that before in this kind of contest. Ultimately, nobody has, Jasper said, the public support right now to win the speakership. I think the biggest question is, can Dustin Burrows stomach a Democratic majority coalition backing him for speaker? That's going to invite a lot of PR problems for him, not just now, but throughout his entire speakership into the next primary. Because members on the right flank of the party, the operatives on that part, they're chomping at the bit for another primary clash. They think they can take out more Republicans that they've been targeting for years. And so maybe that happens, maybe it doesn't, but that's going to be a problem that Burrows needs to contend with. And, I think right now, if push came to shove, he could have the gavel if he wanted right now, provided he will take that kind of coalition. But, it is a tall task to get what little Republicans there are on the fence over to his side. We saw him release a list of 38 Republicans, 38 Democrats, declaring he had the votes. That was very intentional because he doesn't want a Democratic majority coalition that just would invite so many problems. And then you had the fact that we saw a handful of members drop off, one Democrat, multiple Republicans, immediately after the list was released. So this thing, I have no idea how it's going to shake out. There's a lot of talk about a third candidate jumping in. Who knows if that happens? There's a few names that are floated around every time this topic gets brought up. But you have a very fractured Republican caucus and a quite fractured Democratic caucus right now, and that just generates a giant mess for this, and it doesn't really bode well for next session, I think.
Well, I was speaking with the Texas GOP chair, Abraham George, and I asked him point blank if Republicans who support Dustin Burrows should expect to be primary challenged. And his quote to me was, quote, pretty much, yep. So what do you make of that?
I mean, it's pretty clear that this is the direction the party's been going for a while. It's not new with Abraham George. He's just continuing along. There's a lot of um, disdain for what happened during the caucus vote, the walkout. Now, the other side has its points to make about whether this isn't become an illegitimate process, but that doesn't change the fact that the Republican Party put in its bylaws and its platform the desire, the need to select a Republican speaker um, through the caucus process and not through bipartisan governing on the House floor. So regardless, they're going to find their primary targets regardless of what happens. Dustin Burrows will probably be at the top of the list there, and he knows it. But the this continued clash between these overarching political forces that are trying to direct the party, not just the official apparatus, but the entire world of Republican politics in the state, one way or the other. This thing isn't ending. It's been raging for a long time, and this is only heating up.
Jasper, did you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think just thinking about the primaries, it'll be a really good test of just how much this issue that, as Brad mentioned, has kind of been a inside baseball situation where it's, the speaker's elected by the 150 members of the House. 99% of, or, maybe 95% of Texans have, at any given time, probably have no idea who the Texas House Speaker is. So the primaries will be a good test of just how much all of this drama is resonating beyond this kind of insular world that we're a part of. That we're all aware of it, but and I think that has had sort of mixed results in the past when it's a lot of these players have been around for a while. They have especially on the hard line, the rightmost side of the party have this is not their first rodeo. They've tried to get rid of Republicans who supported prior speakers, Joe Strauss, Dennis Bonnen. It's I think, and they have at times gotten rid of some of the primaried successfully the chairman under Joe Strauss, and but I think people forget that before this latest round of where there were a lot of forces going after folks who supported the Republicans in the House who supported impeaching Ken Paxton, who stood against the education savings account program. Only a cycle or two before this, Speaker Phelan was highly successful fending off a lot of these attacks, spent millions of his own dollars, and that rightmost faction was kind of in a lull. It was, I would say, at its lowest point, and they have really reemerged recently with, sort of this confluence of, again, just the combination of the Paxton impeachment, the push for vouchers, which has had powerful backers behind it. So I think, it's kind of a question of how much of this energy that we've seen, the success in ousting these perceived rhinos or folks who are insufficiently conservative, how much of that is anger over supporting Dade Phelan, Dustin Burrows, supporting the impeachment of Ken Paxton, how much of it is that versus the influence of Greg Abbott's millions of dollars. And I think there's a train of thought that some of that was, the not a whole lot of the energy in these primaries came from that, grassroots Paxton wing, and a lot of it was engineered by Abbott. So I think, the 2026 primaries will be a good test of, can the House Speaker's race be a mobilizing factor, getting folks to turn out to the ballot box.
Well, we're going to be talking about the 2026 primary as soon as the legislative session ends, because candidates have to start ramping up their fundraising. And we've already seen the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, teasing a lot of Republicans as to whether he is going to challenge Senator John Cornyn, who is up for reelection in 2026. So what do you make of that? He said just last couple of weeks that he is considering this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brett.
he's absolutely considering it, and he did not get the U.S. Attorney General nomination. That was something he really was gunning for, and so this is not exactly a consolation prize running for U.S. Senate, but it's the rung right below, and he and Cornyn have fought it out for years now. Cornyn sent some pretty pointed tweets his way during impeachment, including a quote, "Hard to run from prison, Ken." Paxton is not forgetting that, and that will be the top theme of the primary if Paxton does run against Cornyn. But Cornyn is no slouch himself. There's a lot of assuming that Paxton can get him if he wants it, and I don't know that that's true. This would be a very tight race, a very contested primary with a lot of money dumped in, especially on the Cornyn side. He can fundraise better than almost anybody else, and his fave unfave numbers are pretty good among the general electorate. Now, does that translate to the Republican primary? That's a totally different question. But throw into this the fact that the Republican Party of Texas is trying to close its primaries. How does that affect things if it is indeed implemented in 2026? A lot of open questions here, but Paxton is definitely considering those.
Jasper?
Yeah, all the public and private signals seem to be that Paxton's not only considering it, but kind of leaning in that direction. And I think it's worth mentioning too that the effect that this could have on some of these down ballot legislative races that we've just been talking about, if you have this kind of clash of the titans at the top, where it really magnifies this divide in the party, it would kind of crystallize that nicely in some ways to have the Paxton versus Cornyn at the top of the ballot, and I think that could just that could really help some of those folks on the rightmost wing in their mission to oust the sort of the boroughs supporting House members to continue moving the legislature to the right. If you've got this high profile battle at the top, where Paxton himself is on the ballot challenging someone who the grassroots has seen for a while as someone a Senator John Cornyn, who they've seen as insufficiently conservative. I think that that could really bleed down the ballot quite a bit.
Do you think we're going to see movement among the statewide because all the elected statewides are going to be up for reelection aside from Senator Cornyn next year in 2026? So, I do wonder if there's going to be movement. Governor Abbott told me, he's definitely going to run for reelection. But what about the lieutenant governor? He's indicated that he's going to run again, but he is 76. And we know that the Texas comptroller, Glenn Hager, has said he's not going to run for that office again. And so a lot of people are wondering, well, would he run for lieutenant governor if, Dan Patrick decides to retire?
Yeah, we left last cycle thinking maybe there's a chance the whole dam breaks, and I don't think that's going to happen. I think there's a really good chance that you only have Glenn Hager's spot open up. Now, maybe add Ken Paxton's if he does indeed run against Cornyn. But other than that, why would these guys down the ballot chase something they have a really difficult time winning, which would be unseating Patrick or Abbott? It's just not going to happen. Patrick, I've heard no indication other than just floated rumors that he's not going to run, and I wouldn't put much stock into that. I think he will run for one more term. But eventually the dam will break and the chess pieces will start to move. But it's been pretty underwhelming, especially looking at the nominations to the Trump administration. That was another route that we thought maybe a lot of things open up. Sid Miller's still here, for now at least. Don Buckingham's still in the JLO spot. Patrick's still as lieutenant governor. Paxton's still attorney general, and Abbott is still governor. Status chalk one up for the status quo. It's sticking around for the time being. Maybe that changes, but I wouldn't put much stock in that.
Jasper?
Yeah, I think pretty much agree with everything Brad said there. The one point that could, I guess counterbalance go against that is that everyone says that they're running for another term, even when it's just to avoid the lame duck situation. And I think especially with Dan Patrick, so much of his power is derives from the support of the senators who just don't want to be seen going against him. He has shown that he's willing to throw folks in the doghouse if they step out of line. So I think you know, it's possible that he is saying he's running for another term to, basically make clear to his senators that they
Don't challenge him. Don't buck
exactly.
him.
So
Yeah.
but I think we could also see a situation if Dan Patrick does decide to hang up the cleats and Ken Paxton does go ahead and run against Cornyn, Hagar doesn't run, and then Don Buckingham. I think it's fair to say she would at least consider a run for lieutenant governor, or at least she'd be on the short list there. Pretty much everyone who over the last several decades who's held that office of land commissioner has run for something else, some higher office. So you could see a kind of a crazy musical chairs situation. I mean, if not in 2026, for sure in 2030. But I think it could still, we still don't know exactly how it's going to play out in 2026. Aside from, I think it's a pretty safe bet that Abbott will be on the ballot.
And then, the last thing I'd just bring up is, who would the Democrats be to challenge Governor Abbott, to challenge Senator Cornyn? That's something that we'd have to wait and see as well.
Yeah, it's the Democrats in Texas right now have very little bench, and that's a big problem for them. They're going to have to build that up over the years, and that's a long-term problem. This is not a short-term solution here to that. Does Colin Allred jump back in? It sounds like definitely not to challenge Governor Abbott. Maybe that changes. Who knows? Does someone like Senator Nathan Johnson from Dallas, who's frequently seen as a rising star in the Democratic Party, does he leave his comfy spot as a Texas senator to take a run at Governor Abbott, which is probably a lost cause, especially given what we just saw happen in the recent election? I don't really see that happening. Why would he waste his political capital on that instead of sit around waiting for the right time? So that kind of leaves like a Lupe Valdez situation for Democrats. Do they just throw a sacrificial lamb at the governor who's stronger than ever, wealthier than ever in terms of his campaign war chest.
Mhm.
It's just a very difficult uphill battle for anybody to try and gain any ground on Abbott right now. And Democrats are in the political wilderness. They got to figure some stuff out before they plan the next campaign.
But doesn't Senator Johnson, isn't he a freebie because he was just reelected? So he could run and still go back to his seat, right?
That's true, yeah. But you're still using up political capital in a campaign, and that's precious. If you lose, you're tainted as a loser, regardless of what happens. And some people can overcome that. Beto O'Rourke decided to run for president and governor after he lost the U.S. Senate race. Now that was after he made it very competitive against Senator Ted Cruz. So Democrats, regardless, their long-term task here is to set themselves up to be competitive in the 2030 election before redistricting happens, to gain enough seats in the legislature to have more of a say than they did this last time, to try and gain some seats on the Supreme Court, to try and have more of a say in how that litigation shakes out. There's more at play than just can we take out Governor Abbott. And frankly, I think their eye needs to be more on that ball than trying to unseat a very strong and well-funded Republican rival.
Jasper, we'll let you get the last word on this.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And part of the problem for Democrats is that they have had this lineup of a rotating cast of rising stars for years now, and it's as Brad said, it's been a very thin bench, and you see folks like Lena Hidalgo, the Harris County judge, for example, mentioned frequently as a rising star, has run into political issues. She barely survived her last reelection and has faced some mental health challenges. So I think she and some her aides facing legal challenges. So I think it's that's sort of the issue you run into is just with this rotating cast, you have folks who it's far from guaranteed that they're going to be untainted by the time they decide to run for statewide office, or they're coming from if you're talking about a state rep or a state senator, the name recognition coming in when you're running in a state of 30 million people, there's a lot of work you have to do, and that requires a lot of money. That it kind of remains to be seen how willing national donors and even in-state donors are going to be to continue throwing money at these statewide Democrats who just looking at the margins at the top of the ballot in the presidential race, Colin Allred's race, these were not as close as these Democratic candidates have been promising. So I think on top of all those challenges, it's also just which Democrats are going to be willing to sort of, I think it's perceived to be almost falling on the sword at this point, after so many challenging losses after that close 2018 Beto race. So a whole bunch of challenges for Democrats in 2026. And I think Brad is absolutely right that the party should be and probably will be playing more of a long game looking to 2028 and 2030.
Jasper Scherer with the Texas Tribune, Brad Johnson with the Texan. Thank you both so much and enjoyed the conversation. Happy New Year to you guys again, and we'll see you down in Austin.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Jack.
Jack.